Hey guys, TomBoss21 here, and today I'm going to show you 5 simple habits that will transform your poker game. These tips are easy to implement, they're designed to sharpen your thought process, eliminate systematic errors, and help make strong play feel more automatic. Let's dive in. My position in the poker industry is somewhat unique. You see, most coaches specialize. They get really good at some format, or they get really good at teaching some player type. But my time at GTO Wizard has taught me to generalize. That means I cover all different formats and teach all different player types. As I was crafting this video, I wanted to find 5 habits that could help as many players as possible, whether they're grinding low stakes online or battling high stakes live games. So I designed these habits to be immediately implementable, useful across all skill levels and formats, and focused on eliminating systematic errors. If you apply these tips consistently, they'll sharpen your thought process and are virtually guaranteed to improve your game. Here's what we're covering today. First habit, name the nuts. Every single time the community cards change, name the strongest possible hand, and after a while, this is going to become a completely subconscious part of your game. Secondly, everything's a draw. Every single hand is a draw. Do you have third pair on a dry disconnected board? No, you don't. You have a draw with 5 outs. Every hand is drawing to something better, and this is kind of a crucial part about how an optimal strategy is constructed, is that you have to think about the value of your hand by the river, by showdown. So I'll show you how solvers actually use this rule to determine which hands to pot control with and which hands to build a pot with. Thirdly, the 3-second rule. This is basically just a way to prevent yourself from giving away timing tells. You wait 3 seconds if you're going to continue in the hand. This sounds simple, but I'm going to show you how when you snap call or when you make any snap decision, you're basically telling your opponent, I didn't have a hard decision, right? I didn't have to think about raising. I didn't have to think about folding. And this basically narrows down your hand really quickly. And I'll show you how to punish people that make this mistake by accident. Fourthly, the credibility check. So this is just a way to make sure that your betting story makes sense and it helps you pick good sizings and stuff. Essentially, before you bet, I just want you to name like 3 hands in your head that would take this line for value. By doing this consistently, you're going to find that you're more consistently going to pick sizes that make sense given the betting action and given the texture. You can also apply it to your opponent to see if their line makes sense. And fifth, find the pure plays. This is kind of a tip for studying solvers. It's a good way to find like which hands are dictating the strategy and kind of aligns with the incentives of the solve. All right, so let me get into each of these in a little bit more detail now. Okay, tip number 1 is to name the nuts. I think a lot of pros would scoff at this tip because it's so simple, but the truth is that everyone gets surprised from time to time. If you've ever played poker and you're like, oh crap, I didn't even see that my opponent could have a straight here. How did I miss that there's a straight possible on this board? Or whoops, completely overlooked the fact that the backdoor flush completed. I got all this money in with a straight, wasn't thinking about the flush. Or, oh crap, there's better boats out there. I got everything in with the worst possible boat, but I didn't even think about the fact that my opponent could have a better boat. If you've ever found yourself feeling surprised, it's probably because you haven't implemented this into your thought process. Now, the truth is that highly experienced players have already made this an automatic part of their game, but they might not have done so through training. They probably did so through experience, right? You play enough hands of poker, eventually this does become an automatic part of your game. But you don't have to gain that experience manually through trial and error, through pain. You can gain this experience through just active training for a day, right? If you just name the nuts a few hundred times on a few hundred boards, eventually you're going to get so good at it that you can look at 5 cards and just know, without even thinking about it, what the best hand is. And then you'll never be surprised again. By actively training this, you'll also learn to kind of contextualize the strength of your own hand and put it into perspective and think about, can me or my opponent credibly rep the nuts in this situation? Here's how you guys can train this. Now, you could just take a deck of cards at home, deal out 5 cards, and practice saying the nuts out loud. But in GTO Wizard, you can do the same thing. So just pick any random spot, let's say button versus big blind, and we'll be utilizing this randomize button here. This is going to deal us some random cards. And as soon as I deal out the flop, I want you to think of what the nuts is immediately, okay? Are you ready? Let's go. Best hand is a set of queens, right? And what I'm going to do now is just check it down to the river, and we'll change that to range. And the reason is I don't actually want you guys paying attention to the strategy. I want you paying attention to the flop and turn river. Okay, best hand is a set of queens. Next, still a set of queens. Next. Now the best hand is a straight 5-8, right? So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so now I want to go back. We're going to, and I want to clear out the turn and river card. So I'm just going to choose a different flop action that'll clear that out and then randomize the flop. Best hand is a set of queens. Random turn card. Best hand is quad fours, followed, of course, by queens full of fours, tens full of fours, and so on. Check it down to the river. Best hand is still quad fours. Okay, back to the flop. Clear it out. Randomize the flop. Best hand is the queen jack straight. Still the queen jack straight. Now the best hand is the 3-4 straight flush. I almost said the king high flush, but I was paying attention, luckily. Okay, one more time. We will randomize this. Best hand is quad threes, followed, of course, by fives full of threes. Still quad threes, followed by kings full of threes. And now the best hand is still quad threes. Okay, and we'll do that one more time, just for good measure. Random. Best hand is a set of queens. Random. Best hand is quad twos. Random. Best hand is still quad twos. So you guys get it. That's kind of the process. You just kind of keep going through there, and you can add on to this by naming like not just the first nuts, but like the first few nuts. That'll get you even better at this. But basically, I think if you practice this like a few hundred times, you just get so absurdly good at it that you don't even have to think about what the best hand is. Now, if you were watching me do that and you were thinking, wow, that was really fast, it's easier than it looks, right? Just go and click through a few hands. You'll find that after a little bit of practice, this becomes very automatic. Rule number 2, everything is a draw. This is a pretty important mindset shift that's going to get you in the habit of thinking of made hands as draws, because they are, realistically. So what I want you to do is every time the board changes, think about how your hand improves. How does my hand become the nuts? What is the best possible runout? Or, alternatively, what runouts might counterfeit my hand? The reason you do this is because it's going to help you gauge your implied odds and your reverse implied odds. It's going to help you figure out like if your outs complete their draws. So how clean are your outs? And generally speaking, you want to try and build pots with hands that have good visibility. Let me show you what I mean. Cutoff versus big blind single raise pot. The flop is queen 6-5 monotone. Cutoff c-bets action on big blind, and here we can see that they're check raising with a set of sixes as well as a set of fives. Now this may seem a little bit enthusiastic because after all, do you really want to get stacks in with a set here? Like, aren't you just going to run into a flush a lot? Well, let's take a look. On the ranges here, we can say, first of all, only about 9% of cutoff's range is a flush. It's still a lot of flushes though, and if we get a fourth heart, it's going to be even more flushes. But a set of sixes is not just a set of sixes. You have boat outs, right? If you have a set of sixes here, you have pretty good outs to outdraw your opponent's flushes and then stack them. So let's say we raise and they call and we get a queen. What this means now is that we get to get all of our opponent's chips whenever we have a set. And you can even slow play this. You can see it's checking because cutoff should bet a lot on a turned queen, and then we can just, annihilate them. That's the idea. Think about how your hand improves. Let me show you another example here. Let me clear this, and we're going to go like ace, king, 3. This is a fun one. Ace, king, 3. Now, I want you to notice something here. Actually, let me make the lower card a bit higher. We're going to go ace, king, 7, just to make this more obvious. I want you to note that cutoff is betting all of this 7x. Ding, 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 ding. Why? Why is cutoff betting all of this 7x? Well, because 7x is not just a pair, it's also a draw, right? If you have queen 7 here, you're drawing 5 outs for 2 pair and trips, but the queen is, well, in this case, the queen also acts as an additional draw towards runner straight. You'll notice that it's using these hands rather than any of these hands, right? Because these hands don't have those 5 outs towards 2 pair and a draw. And so it's turning third pair immediately into an overbet bluff. Even though it feels like you're overplaying your hand immediately, it's okay to turn these hands into a draw if you get sufficient fold equity. And in this case, it does, because you end up folding out all of these king X hands, and then on the next street you bet again and you fold out even some top pair. So yeah, turning second pair into a bluff. Let me show you one other example. Here we'll go with, let's say, king, queen, 5. And we'll put in a small bet this time. Action on big blind. Now, let's take a look here. And I want you to pay attention to 6s here. So, first of all, why is 6-6 calling more than 4-4? It's not because 6-6 is all that much stronger. It's because 6-6 is better than a 5, right? But furthermore, I want you to pay attention to the fact that we continue with 6s that have a heart and fold with 6s without a heart. Now, why do we think that is? Is it because we block flushes or unblock flushes? No, it's probably just because you have 2 outs to a hidden set. So like if you hit a 6, you get a set, and if that happens, you would rather do it on a board that's not going to complete your opponent's flushes. So let's say, for example, big blind calls, and here we'll open up the turn reports, and let's say big blind here has 6 of hearts, 6 of diamonds. In this case, we're going to have a ton of EV on any 6, right? So these are like, this is where 6s is deriving almost all of its value, is where it hits this 2-outer. And I know it's weird to think of like this pocket pair as a draw, but it is a draw. You have 2 outs, right? It's half a gut shot, as they say. But now think about what happens if you don't have the 6 of hearts. Let's say you call with the 6 of clubs and 6 of diamonds. Well, now one of your heart outs is poisoned, right? So let's say you have 6s and the turn comes the 6 of hearts. Sure, you hit a set, but now all the flushes get there and you can't be very aggressive or get that much money with your set. So this is why it's really important to think of every hand as a draw. Kind of like regardless, your hand is always drawing somehow, and that's really important. Let me tell you guys about the magic of the 3-second rule. Pretty much every low stakes player has like massive timing tell problems. So this rule is very simple. It just says wait 3 seconds before acting if you plan to continue in the hand. And this is going to prevent you from giving off timing tells. When someone makes a snap decision, what they're basically saying is that they didn't have to think about alternative decisions. So if you bet the flop and your opponent snap calls, what that means is that they never had any intention of raising or folding. They were just going to call because it's a very easy call for them. And that greatly narrows down their range. It means they're much less likely to have a value hand that would have considered check raising, and they're much less likely to have a bluff that would have considered folding, so their range would be more condensed. If somebody snap bets the flop, it means they didn't have to think about checking back. If someone snap raises, it means they didn't have to think about calling or folding. And so these snap decisions, they just give away a lot of information about your range. Now, I'm not saying that they're perfect. No timing tell is ever perfect, but it still gives off a lot of information. And I'll show you how you can punish people that are careless about their timing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here's a pretty simple example. So it's Jack 8-7. Let's say that you bet the flop, say 40%, and big blind snap calls. Now, if you were in big blind's shoes, wouldn't you, let's say, consider raising if you had a straight? Like, would you ever snap call a straight here? I think I would at least pause for a moment and consider check raising. I'm not saying I would never slow play this hand, but like, wouldn't you at least pause for a second, right? So when they snap call, it means that they don't have this hand, because this hand would have paused at least to consider raising. The same is true for sets to pair. Like, these hands should at least consider check raising. What about combo draws? Well, let's say these hands here. These hands have both a straight and a flush draw. Like, wouldn't you at least consider raising some of these hands? Like, would you ever snap call a combo draw? I think I would consider raising. What about, like, a lot of these really trashy hands, you know? I mean, like, if you have 5-4 of diamonds here, like, wouldn't you have to think about it a little bit, maybe? So when they snap call, they remove a ton of these hands from their range. I'm not saying they can never snap call with the nuts. I'm saying that it's just way less likely. And so the way we can represent this in a solver is by node locking. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to node lock our c-bet, because the thing is, we couldn't have anticipated that they would snap call. And so if I start by changing the big blind strategy, then button will change their strategy in response. So lock everything up until the snap call. So the way we do that is go to the lock and unlock, lock it all in place, ding. Now here what we do is we click this node lock button, set strategy, and all I want to do is just remove the straights, sets, two pair, etc. from the range. So I'm going to click raise 100%. And again, I'm not saying that they would always raise these hands. I'm saying that if they snap call, they probably don't have these hands. And all I'm doing is removing these hands from their calling range. So sets, straights, two pair, raise, raise, raise. Now these hands are all red, indicating that they're no longer in the calling range. Combo draws would have at least considered a raise, I think. So we remove the combo draws. Let me filter those. These are all red now, meaning they're no longer in the snap call range. What about these trash hands? Well, I think like hands like 5-4. These hands probably aren't in the calling range, right? These hands would have at least considered it. I think that hand like, let's say Queen 10 here, I think these hands would consider raising sometimes, you know, these gut shots. So all we're going to do is lock it up. And now what this means is that their calling range is mostly just one pair of hands, right? Third pair, second pair, top pair. These hands that have pretty easy calls. So I'm going to node lock this in place. And we're going to see that this allows the button to get pretty out of line. So big blind calls. And here we're going to pick, let's say, a brick just to demonstrate like how crazy this can get. So here we can see that the button is going for a nice 175% pot-sized bet, as one does. And the reason is simple. It's that the big blind can't really represent anything very strong here, right? So if we just take a look at the ranges, we can see that the big blind really just doesn't have anything better than one pair most of the time. So if we go like, they don't have any sets, straights, two pair, over pair, like the best thing they can really represent is a single pair hand. And so because that's the only thing they can represent, that means that we get to polarize, right? So that means that we, in the button, get to represent the nuts and a bluff and force them to play a bluff catching game with one pair. And it's as simple as that, guys. Like, if your opponents are snap calling, it means that they did not have a difficult decision, that their call was very easy, which narrows down their range considerably. And it's the same with any snap decision. If your opponent is snap raising, they probably didn't have to consider folding or calling. If your opponent is snap betting, they probably didn't have to consider checking. So you can get pretty deep into the weeds with timing tells and like how to punish people's ranges based on their timing tells. This is just one example of like how out of line a solver will get if you remove all of these nutted hands from your opponent's range. But yeah, this is why I say implement the 3-second rule. Every decision you make, if you plan to continue, wait 3 seconds. This will prevent people from exploiting your timing tells. And furthermore, if you use a bit of node locking, you can learn how to exploit their timing tells. All right, this fourth habit is really powerful. It's called credibility check. The reason this works so well is because it forces you to consider the story that your actions are telling before you tell your story. So before you bet, simply list 3 value bets that would take this line for this bet size. By doing this, it helps you choose credible lines and helps you choose better bet sizes because you're actually thinking about what your value hands would do in this spot. This is going to make your bluffs more believable. It's going to prevent strong players from exploiting you and prevent you from choosing like really fishy lines. And you can also use this, like if you get good at this, about thinking what the value hands would do in this spot, you can also use it to pick off your opponent's bluffs or overfold to like under bluff lines, for example. So let's say you bet the river and your opponent check raises, list 3 bluffs that would bluff here. If you can't find 3 bluffs, they probably aren't bluffing. Or if, let's say, your opponent bets the river for some like pot-sized bet, list 3 value bets that would do this. And if none of it really makes sense, like if there's no way they would bet this size with this value hand, then they probably just don't have much value and they're over bluffing and you can just call all your bluff catchers. So the credibility check is a really powerful way to improve your game by sharpening your range analysis skills and improving your thought process. All right, guys, let me show you how you can use this in practice. So I've chosen a blind versus blind single raise pot. Flop is 10-10-3. We check, get called, turn is a king, and this checks through, action on the river. And let's say you get here with a hand like 6-4. Now we can see that 6-4 is choosing these sizes, but in practice, what are you representing when you bet here? Well, let's run through it. In my mind, I think I would probably be representing queens, jacks, maybe like king X with a dumb kicker, right? Like king deuce. Queens, jacks, and king deuce makes a ton of sense in this line because yes, I would want to bet the flop with queens almost always. And I would almost always check on the turn when the turn comes a king. So queens and jacks makes a lot of sense. Kings makes, like, king X with a low kicker makes sense. And so if I'm going to bluff, I want to represent a size that can represent one of these things, right? And so for that reason, I think I would pick, like, probably a 75% pot size bet can represent all of these things nicely. Here we see the solver splitting between like a 60% and an overbet or whatever, but realistically, I just want to bet like a medium large size, right? I think that's going to be a good size for like queens. And if I can represent queens, then I can represent, then that's like the size my bluff wants to go into. Now let's say that, for example, the small blind picks kind of a dumb size. Let's say they pick 25%, which, what do you want to bet 25% with? I guess like exactly aces, like this is a weird size. Now, if I'm in the big blind and my opponent bets 25% pot on a double paired board, I'm probably going to call with jack high. Like, to be honest, I'm probably just going to way overcall this because I don't believe it. Like, if they had a full house, like if they had a king or a 10, would they bet quarter pot? Like, this is probably just like a counterfeited pocket pair that's betting this size. So I probably just call with queen high, all my jack high, all my ace high. Yeah, I just don't trust this size. So again, just think about what hands some line is credibly representing, right? Here, a quarter pot bet, you can't really credibly represent a boat. You can't really credibly represent much of anything with this bet size. So you can basically, like big blank, just call super wide here. And you can use this to choose better sizings. You can use it to sniff out overbluffed or underbluffed lines. Anyway, hope that helps. And tip number 5, find the pure plays. In game theory, a pure play is when you're not mixing multiple actions. So if I always call with this hand in this spot, that is a pure action. If I always fold, that's a pure action. Whereas if I'm mixing calls and folds, that's a mixed action. And this is actually like a really important point in game theory because pure actions clarify value thresholds. Also, we have something called mixing mistakes versus pure mistakes in solver theory, where if you, for example, if you're playing against GTO and a hand is supposed to, let's say, call half the time, fold half the time, against a fixed equilibrium strategy, it doesn't matter if you always fold or always call. You're not going to lose EV unless your opponent exploits to or deviates to exploit that imbalance in your strategy. Whereas a quote-unquote pure mistake is when you deviate away from a pure action. So folding a hand that literally always calls is a pure mistake because it loses EV against your opponent's strategy without them even needing to adjust. So when you're starting with solvers, it makes sense to first outline where the pure actions are, like what hands are doing something in pure, because that's going to kind of clarify the value thresholds and the incentives of the position. And we find that this leads to less tunnel vision while studying. Shout out to Madman Slime for sending in this tip, by the way. This is a nice one. Okay, last example here. We have cutoff versus button 3-bet pot. So cutoff opens, button raises, cutoff calls with this range. We take a flop, king 10, queen 2-tone. Here, the cutoff should check everything. If we check the compare EV mode, we're going to notice that betting is a strictly lower EV strategy than checking for the majority of our continuation range. So we're going to just go back to strategy, check it over, and again, identifying the pure actions, we'll notice that button should always bet this flop. And the reason is relatively straightforward. It's because the button absolutely smashes this Broadway-heavy flop with their Broadway-heavy range. Well, the big blind's range is going to struggle with all of these crappy pocket pairs that just whiffed. So here, let's say the button bets. And now I want to identify the pure actions in cutoff's range. So the first thing we're going to do is switch this over from vertical view to horizontal view. And what this does is it shows each combination individually: spades, hearts, diamonds, clubs. And so, for example, we can see that, let's try filtering out for the low pairs. And these hands are basically always folding, but Tom, some of them are continuing. Okay, well, let's filter those out. Let's say we have excluding the spades. Okay, now we're folding 100% of the time, as you can see. So we've already identified that continuing with any of these hands is a pure mistake, right? And if we take a look at the expected value, the EV of calling with a hand like sevens here is negative 0.6, which doesn't sound like much, right? Until you realize that this is per hand. So what happens when you multiply negative 0.6 by 100? Well, you end up with negative 60 BB per 100. Okay, so not a great hand, right? So calling here is a it's a pretty big mistake, right? And you want to eliminate those massive blunders from your strategy. Furthermore, we might identify some pure calls. So the way I would start with this, rather than looking at the hand grid, is maybe I would take a look at, let's see, like top pair here appears to be pure green. So I'll highlight this, and we can identify some of these hands are pure calling. And it appears to be primarily top pair without hearts. Straights are mixed, sets are mixed, two pairs mixed for the most part. So lots of mixed decisions, but by starting with the pure decisions, it makes it easier to not get tunnel visioned on like nonsensical, like tiny things like, well, why are we continuing with this eights and not that eight? So you're missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is all of these hands fold for the most part. And that's going to clarify your value thresholds. That's the more important thing to focus on. This minutia is like, this is less important than this is the thing that you should pay attention to, not the minutia. Okay. So that's what I mean by pay attention to the pure actions. It just makes it easier to clarify what your value thresholds are. Makes it easier to understand like the incentives of the position, how valuable different hands are in different spots. Just kind of improves what you look at when you start looking at a solve. Okay, guys, let's summarize these 5 simple habits. So if you watched the whole video, thank you for watching. If you skipped ahead to just let me give you the TLDR, here it is. Firstly, name the nuts. Every time the community cards change, find the strongest hand. Find the second, third, fourth, fifth nuts. Do this consistently for a few hundred hands, consciously and consistently, and you'll soon find that you become so good at it that you don't even have to think about it. You'll look at a board and subconsciously just know what the nuts are without even thinking about it. And then you'll never be surprised again, right? And that's going to save you a lot of big costly mistakes in the future. Secondly, everything's a draw. Every single hand is drawing. Doesn't matter what you have a draw. So get into the habit of thinking of made hands as draws. Get into the habit of thinking about how your hand can improve and how your hand strength will change on future streets. And then choose to build pots with hands that have good visibility rather than hands that have terrible visibility. Thirdly, the 3-second rule. This is designed to prevent you from giving off timing tells. Remember that every snap decision is broadcasting that you didn't have to think about that decision. So if you snap call, you didn't have to think about raising or folding. You knew you were going to call. If you snap bet, you didn't have to think about checking back. And this greatly narrows down your range and gives off a lot of information unnecessarily. So the simple rule is that if you plan to continue, wait 3 seconds before you make an action. By doing this consistently, you'll prevent yourself from giving off timing tells and prevent strong players from exploiting you. Furthermore, you can use the opposite side of this to exploit players who are snapping, who are giving off timing tells. Fourthly, the credibility check. So before you put in some bet, consider at least 3 value hands that would take this line for this bet size. And the reason is very simple, right? If you can credibly represent value, then you can also bluff that line, right? This is going to make your bluffs a lot more believable because you're going to be choosing sizes that make sense for the value you're representing. But you're also going to be able to use this to like identify better sizings, identify where your opponents might be over or under bluffing, sniff out the over bluffed lines, etc. 5, find the pure plays. So when you're looking at a solver, start by studying the spots where the solver is taking a pure action. This is because missing pure actions is where you get EV losses against the solver. And it helps you to not get as overwhelmed or tunnel vision while looking at a solution. By identifying the spots that are taking some pure action, it helps you carve out the thresholds more easily, which will also help you remember the strategy more easily. Overall, I think if you guys consistently implement these 5 tips, these 5 habits, you're going to sharpen your hand reading skills, you're going to prevent a lot of costly mistakes, and you're going to just improve your solver-based learning by quite a bit. Alright everyone, that's the video. Hope you liked it, hope you got something out of it, and I hope these tips help out your game. If you're looking for even more tips to improve, check out How to Crush Poker in 2025. I outlined lots of great habits in there that can help you improve.